bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à la deuxième journée de notre célébration du Chenin blanc international. Et on s'est donné rendez-vous, on s'est vu en 2022 en Afrique du Sud et on s'est donné rendez-vous pour se retrouver à Angers et nous sommes là. Donc je dis aussi rebonjour, mais bienvenue à tout le monde qui n'était pas là hier. On a eu des sessions passionnantes et aujourd'hui ce sera pareil. Juste quelques petits conseils techniques. Rosa, vous connaissez déjà. I'm going to speak in English, even though you speak French also, hein, Rosa. Rosa, tu sais très bien parler dans le micro, mais je vois qu'il y a d'autres visages qui n'étaient pas là hier. Donc, n'hésitez pas de bien garder le micro proche de votre visage, because we have a very intelligent translator. But if they can't hear what you're saying, and you also have to not do what I just did, you have to announce the language you're going to speak in. So when you take the microphone to do your intervention, decide which language you're going to do your intervention in. It can be French or English, and then you stick to the language. You don't switch like I do. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then we have 2 sessions this morning, one that will start immediately. We have a little coffee break, and then a second one, and the aim is to end at 12:30. Et maintenant, je vais parler en français. Et après, on va déjeuner ensemble. Et après, on fera des visites extraordinaires cet après-midi. Donc, vous avez choisi votre route. Le bus va partir vers 2h, d'ici juste à côté. Et une petite précision, il y a cet après-midi aussi une masterclass. C'était le goût du végétal. Et ça, c'est uniquement en français. Et il fallait s'inscrire. Donc, ceux qui souhaitent suivre ce masterclass-là, il faut demander ou il faut suivre Sophie cet après-midi. C'est pas cet après-midi, c'est ce matin. Hein, c'est la deuxième session, je vais vous rappeler tout à l'heure. Mais c'est juste là où on va se séparer. Après, il y avait juste quelqu'un qui a oublié ses earphones. Okay. C'était quelqu'un qui était là hier, donc c'est là, si vous ne trouvez pas. Et c'est tout. Étienne, c'est bon pour l'organisation? D'accord, donc on va commencer aujourd'hui la session qui va durer jusqu'à 10h30, Unlocking Genetic Diversity. I'm going to speak in English now, and I would like to call our moderator for the session, who is Alder Yarrow. I knew I was going to do that. Yarrow, please, you are a journalist from the United States, you're a speaker, educator, author of various columns and wine, and you also manage the Old Vine Registry, that's right, in partnership with the Old Vine Conference. Exactly, so very welcome and we're happy to have you here, and you can take a seat. Monsieur Patrice, qui est scientiste, qui était en Afrique du Sud aussi, à INRAE. INRAE is the France's National Research Institute for Agriculture. And vous étiez aussi en Afrique du Sud en 2022. Et on est très heureuse de vous revoir et de faire cette session. Vous êtes le speaker pour la session ce matin. Merci beaucoup. And then I would like also to call Rosa. Rosa, some of you must know Rosa by now. She also did a great intervention yesterday. She's viticulturist from South Africa, and she is also the founder and the leader of the Old Vine Project in South Africa. Welcome, Rosa. Gelukkig ken ik vir. Ek het nou die notas verloor, kan jy glo? Chris Alheit. From Chris, you're the owner and also the winemaker of Alheit Family Vineyards in South Africa. Welcome. And also Pierre Ménard, who's also owner and winemaker of the Ménard Family Vineyards. Welcome also, and you have your panel.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone who made it out of bed this morning. I see not everybody did, perhaps. Too much good Chenin last night. This is a very exciting panel, especially for me because of my role with the Old Vine Registry. We're very interested in old vineyards, and in particular in the genetic treasure troves that they prove to be over time that we are all hoping we can unlock and use to make better and more climate-proof wines in the future. That's going to be an underlying theme for today's conversation. Since I'm from California, however, and this is the land of Hollywood, we're gonna play a movie trick this morning, which is that instead of starting at the beginning of the story, we're gonna start in the middle of the story with the punchline, with the hero hanging off the edge of the cliff, and then we'll find out how he or she got there. But we're gonna do that by having Patrice stand up and tell us about the results, brand new results, of some incredibly interesting research that he has done on the genetics of the Chenin Blanc clone. So jump up there and show us the awesome stuff. And I guess, yeah, here, take that.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk in English, but if you have any question afterwards, I can answer them in French. So, where I am. Okay, so as Adler said, I will be talking about genetic diversity of Chenin clones, and those of you who have been in Stellenbosch 2 years ago, you know that I've been talking about the sequencing of the Chenin genome, and today I will really show the results of the use of this important data. So before I start my talk on Chenin clones, Etienne asked me to just give you a brief review of the evolution of the origin and evolution of cultivars and clones. You probably know that grapes can be reproduced both by sexual and by vegetative reproduction. And so sexual reproduction, what you have is that you have pollen that is pollinating the flowers, and then you get seeds, and from each of the seeds you have a new variety. And for example, in case of Chenin, we know that one of the parents is Savagnin, the other one is still in progress. So once you have this variety, if you are doing some grafting cycle, what you can get is you get some clones. And for example, you have the clone 220 or 880 of Chenin. And so if you have enough replication cycle, then that's when you can have some variability within the cultivars, and that variability can lead to morphological difference. And we know now that there are also some modification at the DNA level. So let's look at that. So if you have very minor differences between the plants, then you call it clones. But sometimes you also have modification on a very important trait, for example, the color. And then when you have this type of modification, what you do, you have like a new derived cultivar. And that's, for example, the case for Pinot Blanc, which is derived from Pinot Noir. And we know that it's very close genetically, but it has a very simple difference that makes the wine completely different, and that's for that it is a different cultivar. And what you have actually is between each of the clones, you probably have some modification of the DNA. And when I talk about modification of DNA, there can be two types. One is like modification of the DNA sequence. And here you have several examples of modification. I don't have the time to go over. Just for example, we know now that, for example, the white varieties, the modification is due to a mobile element that is inserted in front of a gene and modifies the gene expression. the modification can be also epigenetics. So it's not a modification of the sequence, but it does modify, for example, the expression of genes. So knowing all of that, we have been using some molecular strategy to analyze the diversity of the Chenin clones. So one of our objectives is to see if the Chenin clones from France were different from the Chenin clones from South Africa. And so we actually study the genetic diversity between the Chenin clones at the genome level, and we compare the data between France and the material from France and from South Africa. So in terms of clones, we analyze 14 clones, several clones from South Africa, and the main French clones that are registered today. And so as you can see, yesterday, Etienne was showing the importance of clone 220, 880, 1208. So those are the main clones that are used in France. And I imagine, I'm sorry, I don't know the South African material, but I imagine those are also the ones that are the most used. So what did we do? I'm sorry, this slide is a little bit difficult to understand, but the idea is to work on the DNA. So the DNA, you need to extract it. So you start from leaves from the clones. So in France, we extracted here the DNA from the French material. In South Africa, my colleague Johan Berger extracted the DNA from the South African clones. So once we have the DNA, what we do, we sequence this DNA. Sequencing means reading the DNA sequence. So you know that the sequence is made of bases A, T, G, C, and then what you do, you just read it's like in a book. I mean, you're reading the letters of the sequence. And so we are sequencing all the DNA from the 24 clones. And then within each of the small sequence that we obtain, we look for specific sequence of 21 base pair. And we have shown that these 21 base pair sequences are actually, most of the time, unique into the sequence. So we search for all the different possible 21 base pair sequence, and we look them in each of the clones, and we compare the presence of these 21K sequence between the different clones. And so here are the results. I'm sure you're all waiting for that. Sorry.
Drum roll, please.
And so, okay, so actually the sequence of the clones were quite good, and we did several types of analysis. And the first one I'm going to show you is a principal component analysis. In French, an analyse en composante principale. And so this is a way to, because we have a lot of data, and this way with principal component analysis, you would just reduce the data to be able to see it. And here is what you see. So the data, so here you see the African clones are in blue, the French clones are in orange. And the first thing that we can see is that they are very different. You have a very clear differentiation of the clone according to their origin. The second point that is important is that if you look at the numbers of the clones, it looks like the French numbers and the South African number doesn't correspond. Here, for example, you see clones 220 from France and from South Africa are very different. The same for 624. So that is one of the first results. So here you have a view of the variability and the distance between the clones. The second analysis is just to see if we can see the evolution or how the different clones are related. And that is something we did using a method called minimum spanning network. And so in this one, you can see the link between the clones. And here is what you have. So you can see, again, the orange ones are the French, the blue one are the Africans one. And see, here you see a 2D view. You need to think in 3D dimension. And so what you can see, I'm not sure I can really show it. Here, well, you probably don't see it very well, but here you have one, this and those branches, they are just not crossing. One is on the top of the other one. So you need to think about these all branches here being behind the orange one. Yeah. So that means you have, again, a very different branches for the African and the French one. And then, so that means you have really very different evolution, but what is interesting is that it's still connected, and here it's connected between clones 1206 from France and clone 624 from South Africa. So I don't know if it has anything to say that it's completely directly related to, but at least those are the two clones that we found the closest in the analysis. Okay, so just to finish and just some discussion. So there is a clear distinction between the clones. Now, what would be interesting is see if these differences in DNA are really related also to morphological traits. There is no correspondence between the clones, so either it's true, and then that's completely different materials, or they can also be something like an artifact in the analysis. I told you the DNA from France, French clone was done here, the one from South Africa was done in South Africa. So that's also something we need to check if there was any artifact in the analysis. And then there are really two different branches. That means really the French and the South African clones have a very separate evolution. And so just to finish, so the question was, are the clones of Chenin Blanc from South Africa different from the one from Loire Valley? And then I can say yes. And then there, so that means that was the question. There may be Révélateur de lieu. And this data is still needs to be confirmed. Johan Berger is still also working on this side, and so we need really to verify this. Another point is that it may be quite interesting also to compare them in a common vineyards, and probably here or in South Africa, to plant them and really see if, in terms of morphology, the only way to be sure that they are different is to put them in a common place. And then also this data should probably also be extended to other clones. And I was talking with Etienne, so like the clones from here or from non-registered clone from South Africa could also be added. And the last thing is, here you have data on molecular work, but then we also should add historical data, and in particular to see if these networks mean something according to the history. And with that, I'm finished. Thank you.
Let's stay up there for a second. And I will add that we should also add tasting data by expert tasters who can then add an organoleptic analysis to all of this as well. I have a million questions for you. This is super interesting research, and I hope all of you are are in the geekiness with me just for a little bit longer this morning. But I want to ask, when I look at those graphs, and I do not have a scientific degree, they look like they are completely different, that they might as well be totally different clones. When I see the orange over here and the blue over here, can you characterize like how big a difference that is? You've looked at a lot of genetic material across lots of different grapes. Is that a really big result? A medium result?
Okay, so yeah, maybe I should have had in the analysis like different cultivars, and then here you have very small variability, and so it concerns a very small part of the genome. For example, if I put new or other variety on my graphs, they would probably be all the way to, I don't know, Paris or even like California, because when you have, difference between variety are very, very important. So it's like, we have like between two clones in terms of, for example, single modification, we have about like 4 million. Here you have probably like something like 100 or 200.
So I'm thinking about this as like identical twin sisters, but one of them is a bit taller, and maybe her hair is a little bit darker.
Yeah, that's
so we know they're twins, but you can look at them and they look like twins a little bit, but you can tell one's different.
Yeah, that's a good.
So the other fascinating thing about that for me, which is we're exchanging looks over here on the panel, is that some of those South African clones are French clones that only got there how many years ago? When was 220 introduced? No. Clone 220 is on. 220 was in the 70s, right? 1984, clone 220 came to South Africa, and it was genetically identical to French 220 when it started, and here we are, how many years later, and it's...
It's. One reason also is like the environment is very different, and so the evolution probably of the clone has been different in France here in the Loire and in South Africa. So that's maybe also one. That's one possible explanation, probably not the only one. One could also be that there has been some mistakes in the material that was sent. That's also still possible. You have probably all seen clones, and especially if you just are using woods, nothing really differentiates 220 from 664 on woods or things like that.
Yes.
That's another possibility. But
well, we have lots more questions for you, but come back.
Okay.
So that was the climax of the narrative, right? Is like there's this amazing difference, and now we're gonna go back in time, and Rosa's gonna talk to us about, well, how the heck did we get there? Like, where did these South African clones? How did Chenin get to South Africa in the first place?
Good morning, Alder. Good morning, everybody.
Do you want the clicker so you can move some slides?
Please.
All right.
Etienne and Alder asked me to give you a little bit of a background on where Chenin in South Africa came from. It was first in 1655. It was planted with Palomino, Semillon. Palomino is another name for Listan Blanc, or France Druif in South Africa. Can everybody hear me? I can hardly hear myself this morning. And Semillon, which is Groen Druif. Thank you. Won't you? That's safer with you. And some papers also show we had Muscadel Alexandrie, and it was imported by a guy with the name Jan van Riebeek to South Africa and the Cape. The Dutch had no wine tradition at that time, and it was only after the French Huguenots settled in the Cape between 1680 and 1690 that the wine industry started to flourish. The primary intention of the settlement in the Cape, why did Jan van Riebeek go to the Cape? It became a halfway station between Europe and the East to supply fresh products to the passing ships, like vegetables and wheat and other things. Initial cuttings of Steen or Chenin came from the south of France and was later in 1820 also sent from South Africa to Australia. That's what my literature reads. It was also known initially in South Africa as steen. The word for chenin in South Africa for hundreds of years was steen. And it was only in 1963 that Professor Orfer, he was at University of Stellenbosch, the professor of viticulture, matched our steen, the leaves, to the leaves from Chenin in France, and realized that this is actually steen. But if you walk in a vineyard, still now, with the old people, they will say to you, no, that's not Chenin, that's steen. This is a Chenin vine, but that's a steen vine. And if I ask them what's the difference, they'll say it's the red petioles, or it's a petiole, yes. But of course, now we hear it's all Chenin. In 2000, the Chenin Blanc Association was formed in South Africa and established Chenin as a quality wine. Initially started by Irina van Holt, and then Ken Forrester, and then under the wonderful leadership of Ina Smit that we all know, it just became this wonderful, powerful movement in South Africa. It's very popular in South Africa, as we all know. We all love our Chenin, and it's all-purpose. You can use for brandy, for dry wines, semi-sweet wines, and some noble late. Not a lot, but a little bit. It can produce, like we said yesterday, it's like a chameleon grape. It can grow in any kind of soil, in any kind of climate. It can produce up to 40 tons a hectare, which is that, how much is that in your world, hectoliters?
I'm bad at that
That's
conversion. I'm an American. Don't ask me about metric.
In the warm climate where it's irrigated and trellised, or it can make very, very fine wines that we'll taste today from Chris Alheit at hopefully Chris 4 tons a hectare. Oh gosh, okay. In 2007, oh, I love this picture. That's a really old vineyard. Yes. That Chenin, it's always interplanted with other things, the old vineyards in South Africa. And the next, that's in 2007, the Old Vine Project of South Africa started identifying old Chenin vineyards, older than 35 years, all across the country, and gave it to young producers that made beautiful wines from them, like Chris Alheit, Ian Udier, Boekenhout's Kloof. There's presently, we know, 9,000 hectares of Chenin in France, 2,000 California, all sorts of numbers. 2/3 of our Chenin in South Africa dry farmed, and 20% is Goblet pruned. I like the Goblet pruned Chenin. The oldest existing vineyard was planted in 1942, a pure Chenin vineyard. There was a vineyard planted in 1880 something, we're not sure, 1884, but that was interplanted with other varieties. And then we'll talk about the research at some stage, which I would love to mention.
Yeah, but you should tell us more about the Old Vine Project, though, in particular.
Okay. All right, let's just start with research. The Old Vine Project has collaborated with different universities over the last 10 years. And we've done a lot of research. I think Helene Vert is here today. Oh, there she is. She's done wonderful work for us. Professor Johan Burger, Jonathan Stein. Helene Vert found in 2018 that Old Vine Chenin added new sensory attributes to the existing sensory aromas of Chenin Blanc. Completely new ones. Johan Burger found in the same year that old vineyards have a higher acid at a lower bulling. And I will ask Chris about this, his experience of this. At a lower alcohol, a better pH at full ripeness. So old vines naturally don't only have a perceived freshness, they also on paper have a better acidity. One of the directors of the OVP in 2016 had this brainwave that I was very happy about. And we started using a seal on a bottle of old wine showing the age of the vineyard. So that vineyard, that bottle of wine, if you buy that wine, the vineyard was planted in 1974. The number on that I was 5 years old, I can't remember, when that vineyard on the big bottle was planted. So that made a big difference in South Africa because people started identifying with that, identifying with the age of the vineyards. Then, of course, the wonderful work from Professor Dr. Jonathan Stein, yes, that found this, that for every year the vineyard is in the ground, people are prepared to pay for an additional amount of money. They regard the old wines as something of value, of rarity, and that changed a lot for us in South Africa. After that, at the end of the day, we're here to have a business. And if it is no use being romantic about old wines. Old wines must make money, otherwise we lose our farms, and that's the last thing we want. So if we can add value by showing people how old the vineyards are, it can mean a better profitability for the farmer. This deal is only possible in South Africa because we have SAWIS, South African Wine Industry Statistics. It's a fantastic body. If you plant vineyards or if you make wine, sorry Chris, those people can't see me. Sorry, I've turned my back to you. Sorry, I'm talking to Alder.
It's all right. No.
SAWIS, if you plant vineyards or if you make wine, you have to register with SAWIS. So that date on the bottle of wine is a true date. It's completely transparent. That's what the date that the vineyard was planted. Page number 3. Most of our old wines in South Africa are still under the operation, Etienne asked me to refer to this, of big cooperatives. In South Africa we have a system a little bit different to here. We grow grapes and we sell it to the co-ops in the old days, in the previous government. Now we have wonderful young winemakers that make their own wine and sometimes even own their own land. But normally you'll have grape growers and winemakers. The big sellers cooperative that makes thousands of tons of grapes, they would buy it, and the grape grower would never see the end where his vineyards would go to. But now it's changed. With this old wine project, it changed. Now the co-ops all have small little cellars within their big cellars, and they all make old wines, and it's changed the profile of many of the co-ops in South Africa. We have 140 members in the Old Wine Project, and 10 of those are huge big cooperatives, which now specialize also in making old wines. That's good for us, because the co-ops own most of the vineyards in South Africa, or the hectares. So if they can make old wines, it will mean more farmers will survive. So it's not only the small producers, sorry Chris, that make old wines, but also the much bigger producers. These producers can now show also the character of their specific terroir through the old wines. You wanted to ask me something about the Old Wine Project.
Well, I think you've covered the basics of it, and I think this is one of the most important initiatives in the world of wine today, in particular because of those numbers right there. I mean, at the end of the day, the wine world only survives if the people growing the grapes and making the wine can actually make a decent living and pass on something to their children other than debt, right? And the idea that an initiative like this, which is just about highlighting some of the natural, inherent, intrinsic characteristics of the country of South Africa in a way that causes people to want to spend more money on that bottle is huge. And the impact of those 2.64 rand on individual farmers is real,
exactly.
Right? And that can sometimes mean the difference between somebody going out of business and those vines getting ripped up and replanted with Lord knows what, or vines that get to stay in the ground, and a grower or a winemaker that gets to thrive.
I think the Old Wine Project it formed a new category, which is the most important thing. It formed a category that people can identify with. People can look at this and say, oh, ding, this is an old wine. So this must be special. And therefore they'll buy it. It's not a massive wine in front of them anymore. Now it's a new category, which I think was quite successful.
Yes. Okay, but now let's talk about genetic diversity. Because these old vines aren't just special and don't just make great wine. You've done some investigation. South Africa has done some investigation. And there are wholly different, we listed a bunch of clones up here, but there are also a bunch of clones that are not listed up there that we've found in these old vine vineyards. So talk about that.
We have in South Africa have 12 commercial clones. If you go to the nursery, you can buy 12 different clones. Those are all different potential volume or quality. We must remember that most of the clones in most of the countries you would know, was chosen over the years more for potential volume or yield and not for quality. Well, that was definitely the case in my country. So some of the oldest clones just fell by the wayside because they didn't produce enough. And then in about 2010, I can't remember the exact date, we started, I thought, but if these vineyards survived for 80 or 100 years, there must be something special that make them climate resilient. And this is not a scientific approach, I know, once again. It's just, I just had the feeling. And so we started taking cuttings from them, not only Chenin, also Semillon, and also Cinsault, and Muscat, and a Grenache. There's also one Grenache that Ken Forrester actually planted 3 years ago. Matthijssen, he made the wine actually from that recently. So we took cuttings, we took it to Vititech, the nursery, a nursery that I really, really admire, and they cleaned it up from virus. Remember, we spoke extensively yesterday about virus. You can't just take muscle selection and reproduce virus. If it's a clean vineyard, like he did, it's fine, but otherwise you have to clean it up. So they cleaned it up from virus. It was extremely expensive. It took 15 years, 10, 15 years. It frustrated everybody. But now, a month ago, we planted the first 16 new Chenin clones from old vineyards in South Africa. Now, can I just talk about them for a moment?
Yeah. And you need to talk about the scandal.
No, I'm not. These clones are selections. I know Etienne always tells me it's not really clones, it's selections. So I'll use the word selections. Have been surviving for up to 80 years in a very, very extreme climate of storms and wind and heat in South Africa. You saw that first picture. That vineyard is planted almost in beach sand, but the mist from the afternoons irrigates it every day a little bit, and it's survived. I mean, this is just the most wonderful vineyard. They survived, so they have proven to be resilient. Maybe that is the future of planting material. We all go to genetic manipulation of vines, which I really let's say I don't understand it, but I also don't like it. We should actually go to these vineyards that have been there for some reason. Oh, we don't know why they survived. There's a question on why some vineyards survived and others not. The first scientific question asked by people like Etienne Yetlan is if these new selections would not merely be the same as the 12 existing clones on the list. Are they not the same? But we don't know. The oldest vineyards were probably, that's post-phylloxera, so they were probably all Massal selected from other Chenin vineyards. And if they were Massal selected from other vineyards, now we took one and we made one clone from it, but that's the only way we could do it. Secondly, is if these selections in future would be a reflection of their new terroir, or if they would merely be a reflection, or would they have the same character as the wines made from the parents? Is it nature or nurture? Is it a reflection? I believe, and I know it's not scientific once again, but I really believe that vines lose their clonal status after some time. Nobody agrees with me, but you, in a way, confirmed that. Because why are the clones from South Africa and France different if they came from the same source initially? They change with time in their new environment. As many scientists will ask, is there memory in the DNA, or is the new plant merely a reflection of the present environment? Is it nature or nurture? And I'm half one sentence more.
Okay.
The new plantings will of course be clones, as the old vineyards were probably, like I said, Massal selected, to see how the wines from either the young or the old vineyards are going to be similar or not. It's going to be fascinating once we start harvesting these vines and make the wine. And you have to ask, who's going to make the wine?
That's right.
Old vines, I think after 35 years, mutate and become only a reflection of the terroir, the landscape, and the cultural and historical way of that farmer. Because terroir also includes the farmer. It also means the farmer, the way the farmer farmed. And his way of touching and treating the vines. Old vines, I think, after 35 years, mutate and became a reflection of the landscape. Their surrounding or terroir is a more determining factor than their DNA, I think, but I'm not sure about this. And then we took these heritage, we planted the first heritage selection of clones, 16 of them, in a farm in Stellenbosch last month. And we also planting it we're planting at 2 different sites. The 16 different clones in 16 different rows. And from then, people like Mr. Alheit and other, I'm sure Corlia's here, other people in South Africa and Sean, they're going to ask for that material to plant in their own vineyards. We will see the future of that. We don't know. We don't know if it's going to be the same clones as we have. We don't know the quality of that. But I think that's very exciting. If we can plant if we want to plant for the future, we started yesterday by saying we can't just look at old vines historically. We have to learn from them for the future. And if you can plant for the future, if I was a farmer, and I'm not, I would like to plant as many different clones, Chenin clones, in one vineyard or on one farm and increase the diversity and spread the risk of climatic pressures in future. Because if you only have one clone and if you get rain in summer, you lose your crop. But if you have different clones and they might flower at different times, you will have a future. Yes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rosa. Let us transition to Chris, who's two of whose wines we have in front of us. And he, in addition to being an absolutely brilliant, one of my favorite South African winemakers, also has experience working with both old vines, a number of old vine vineyards, and planting new vineyards with existing South African clones, including some that theoretically came from France, but what we just saw are behaving very differently in South Africa. So would you just talk a little bit about your winery? Tell us what we need to know about your wine project, and some of the work you've done in planting new vineyards in addition to working with old ones. And then that's a good transition to some of these wines, yeah? Oh, there's one more.
No, that's me.
Good looking guy there.
Yeah, that guy.
Look at that. And I can take over for the clicking if you want.
Thank you. Is this mic on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you just got to hold it up in front of you as opposed to underneath.
Okay, there we go. Well, thank you, Alder and Rosa. It's wonderful to be here. I must say it's a huge honor and a privilege to be able to present some of our wines to you guys in the context of this event. I just would like to start with saying that for us, and in fact for our entire small family business, it's my wife and I. We started it in 2011 together with a view on making very South African wine. So our entire raison d'être is to have a strong identity, a South African identity. So for me, that's the most key concept in wine in general is identity. So it's kind of special for me to be here in the Loire. In fact, my earliest ancestor, Philippe Fouché, who arrived in the Cape in 1688, was born in Orléans, not too far from here. So it's like a full circle. And I myself have never visited your wonderful valley, so I'm very happy to be here. But identity is the thing. And it's fantastic for me to see the work that Patrice has been doing with Johan, that we can hold hands together, around this wonderful grape that we have. Chenin Blanc is a very noble grape. It's a very honest grape, extremely honest. I think that's what makes it so special. But as South Africa, we shouldn't be borrowing the Loire identity. The Loire is the Loire. South Africa is South Africa. But we have this wonderful thing in common, this special thing, and we'll always be brothers in that way. So let's explore what Chenin Blanc means for us in the Cape. Before talking about the wine, I just quickly want to offer some thoughts on the factors that drive, the results that we've seen today. If you consider the history that Rosa has expounded, we have had Chenin in South Africa for approximately 370 years, and approximately 300 of those years is in an era before there were any nurseries or anything like that. So the propagation of vineyards, the expansion of the national vineyard has to occur from neighbor to neighbor, from father to son, over generations. You can't just drive your car down to the nursery and ask for a favor. You have to go to your neighbor and say, hello, Frikkie, can I please have some vines? I want to plant a vineyard. And he'll say, yeah, sure, pity, these vines yield very well, or these ones don't get too sick, or my daddy planted these and they're pretty good. And so we go on. And so we have time, that can lead to this genetic variability and adaptation to our own place. So that means in the Cape, we're making Chenin, we're making Steen, but we are making South African wine, and I think we have a genetic claim. And I'm very, very pleased that that assertion has been somehow confirmed by the work that these wonderful people are doing. Because if not, then my entire premise is kaput. Thankfully it is not. So let's discuss the wines. We're going to be tasting 3 wines together. And Alder, sorry, I'm talking in circles. To answer your question, as Rosa said, a lot of the old vineyards that were planted in South Africa were planted in a cooperative system. The ones that we have right now, obviously we have a long prehistory, pre-phylloxera. Then we have phylloxera, and then in, I think, 1912, the KWV was created and stepped in to effectively rescue the South African industry. And then we entered a cooperative era, which we still see the remnants of, as Rosa said, but in the last 20 or so years has been a relatively new generation of vignerons and winemakers who are trying to reevaluate the resources that we have, because we have hectares and hectares and hectares of Chenin planted all over the place. So by default, there must be fantastic sites. And I think we'll all agree that site is primary. The site is the main thing. And then you just pray that you have good genetic material on that site to reflect the site accurately. Working with young vines or planting new young vineyards, it's a little bit of maybe going off on a tangent here, but what we've noticed in some of the older vineyards, planted in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that they're Chenin, it's mostly Chenin, but there are some friends planted with the Chenin, and it could be nursery error, it could be intentional, but we often see a little bit of Claret or a little bit of Colombard, Sémillon de temps en temps. You see things, that maybe should not be there, but they are there. So even today, now, when we plan a new Chenin vineyard, we talk about Chenin and friends. So it's maybe 95% Chenin and then some friends. It's like a little sel et poivre,
And is that just your tribute to history, or why are you doing that?
I'm doing that because I like South Africa very much. And even if even if it was a mistake, it's our mistake. So, and it's formed a part of our identity, And again, identity is everything for us. So I'd like to own that identity and not pretend it didn't happen, So I think, and it will certainly help to maintain the character and the flavor of those vineyards. Honestly, the contribution of those friends is probably insignificant, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting for me to see how on your graph how the 106 family, 1061 and 1064 are actually quite far apart, because they were always considered sort of they were formalized in the early 1970s, and a lot of our best vineyards were based on the 106 family. And then I see SN24. SN, by the way, is shorthand for Steen. SN24, which is currently considered probably our best selection right now, before this wonderful thing that Rosa is busy with the identification of these 16 potential new selections. SN24 is outstanding. So we do base a lot of the vineyards on 1064, but usually we'll have between 3 and 6 different selections of Chenin in any given vineyard, just to have variability when we plant new vineyards.
Great.
But anyway, we're here to taste the old vineyards. So the first, can I carry on, Alder? Sorry.
Yeah, please. No, that's perfect transition. I can just step off the stage. You got it from here.
Nice little segue. So we're going to taste 3 wines together, 3 single origin Chenins. The first one is from the Swartland, the second one is from Stellenbosch, and the third one is from an area that we just call it Skursberg, even though The origin is called Citrusdal Mountain, which is not a perfect name for that place, but never mind that. We call it Skoofbach. It's a very different soil. The first two wines are both granitic wines. The soil is granite, decomposed granite. The first wine in your glass, a wine of origin Swartland. In fact, more accurately, it is the Paardeberg Mountain in the Swartland. It's a granite mountain. These vineyards are on a farm that we started working with through Rosa. In fact, she introduced us to this farmer in the year 2011. And in the year 2019, our little company was able to buy the farm. So then I really understood the meaning of pain. Because, I mean, we are many vignerons here, and you'll understand what it costs to farm a vineyard, especially a very, very low-yielding vineyard in a very dry area. But this wine, for me, really captures the Paardeberg. Paardeberg wine, if you let it go too far, if you let it become too ripe, it can become a little bit blasey and a little bit flat. But if you can pick it at the right moment to capture the nervousness and the energy of the wine, then you can get this kind of result. I don't know what the temperature of the wines is like, but they should be okay. So, en anglais, I'm not very good at wine descriptors, but I normally think of this wine in terms of a greener spectrum of citrus and sweet herbs, and I find the palate very pithy and very direct. That's very, very typical.
Chris, and maybe you can answer in terms of this vineyard that we're here tasting, but I'm curious, given the model in South Africa, which is that many of the people who are making the wine don't actually own the vines, you get to go on kind of a shopping trip, or maybe it's more like an Indiana Jones style expedition, through all these vineyards in South Africa, and you see a lot of them, but you only choose to end up working with a few of them. When you're looking at a Chenin Blanc vineyard, when you were looking at these vineyards, in the Paardeberg, what do you see that says, aha, that's a good vineyard, that's going to be one I want to work with? What are those criteria for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly in the beginning, and this was true for many winemakers in my particular generation, is because we were coming out of a post-cooperative era where, as I said, there was a lot of Chenin planted, much of it undervalued. And then you'd had the rise of the Swartland stars like Eben and Sadi and Adi Bartnost and all of these wonderful people, the Molyneux, kind of leading the way. There was an entire generation of people, but I think that I, without sounding arrogant, probably exemplified this because I was obsessed, completely obsessed. I had my Google Earth page is just yellow markers of what could be a vineyard. I would find these things that could be a vineyard. Some of them are still marked Rosa. And I would just drive there, and maybe it was a peach orchard or not a vineyard, but sometimes it was a vineyard. And I would find lots of interesting old vineyards. At the same time, Rosa was busy cataloguing many of the old vineyards, so we were in contact with her. And it was a process of a few years of collecting, effectively cherry-picking what we thought looked like excellent potential Chenin vineyards. And the things that I would look for, generally I was interested in altitude and soil. And I was interested in vigor, so I was looking for moderate vigor. And the crop canopy balance is always a giveaway. So if you see a vineyard in the growing season that has a very good crop canopy balance, in other words, you can see that this canopy is healthy and that it's going to manage the crop. Often you could be onto something, but it's a process of trial and error. I've had one vineyard, which was 700 meters above sea level, in its mid-40s, looked like it was going to be wonderful, and it just wasn't, unfortunately. So you don't know until you try. But through, over a decade and a half, we've really kind of landed on vineyards that I really believe in, that I think are very, very good examples of where they come from. And that's also the main thing, because we have this very, very honest grape. It's going to tell the truth about where it comes from. And again, site is everything. So the first site we tasted is Paardeberg Mountain granite soil, 330 to 350 meters above sea level, facing north. The wines generally are... also, please keep in mind these wines were bottled quite recently. I don't have any other previous vintages available that I could do this, so it's all the young wines, the new wines, the young wines. The Paardeberg wine, generally quite a nervous wine, quite a pithy wine. The second Yeah, wine we're tasting is a Stellenbosch wine. It's also granite soil. So the first two wines are granite and granite, but the place changes completely. So we're going from warm, dry, windy Paardeberg mountainside, quite small canopies, very low yields, to the False Bay coast of Stellenbosch. It's a little hillside called Sinai, and this vineyard is only 60 meters above sea level, but from there you can quite literally see the waves breaking on a clear day. So it's very, very close to the ocean. It has a very strong maritime influence. And we have the summer wind, the South African, in the Cape, we have the southeaster in the summer, which is blowing off the False Bay coast over the vineyard. So granite and granite, but completely different place. So same winery, same winemaker, same philosophy, same process, exactly the same process, very simple process. But I think it's quite clear that the wines are very different. And I think once we get to the third wine, which is called Magnetic North, we'll see again how wonderful and how honest Chenin Blanc is. And I think, Alder, we can perhaps jump over to that slide.
Yeah, I think they may have poured them for everyone else, but not for us.
That's okay. Well, let's talk to you guys that have the third wine in your glass. So Magnetic North, this is a vineyard that Rosa introduced us to at the end of 2010. So this is one of those vineyards that get people like Rosa and Patrice and all of us very excited, because it is these particular, they're two small parcels planted next to each other. One is in 1981 planted and one is in 1983, so the vineyards are not particularly old, they're about my age. But the material is extremely mysterious. We don't know exactly where the material came from. The farmer, Barcy van Lille, who passed away 2 years ago, wonderful man, him and his dad got cuttings from a friend in the valley who had a good vineyard. They said it was a good vineyard. That's what Barcy told me. That vineyard has since disappeared. We don't know exactly where it was. So this is effectively a Massal selection, we think, planted at approximately 550 meters above sea level. And it's a Passal Franc, how do you say it in français, Franc Pied?
On its own roots.
On its own roots, which makes it quite interesting. On top of that, this is the northern foothills of the Cederberg mountain range. So the soils are really, really different to the granite soils that you've just tasted. This is about 1.5 meters of quite red sand, sable rouge. And then you have a small layer of grave, of red gravel. And under that you have very red clay. So it's a terroir very ferric, very iron rich. And it tends to produce wines that have quite a bit of power and structure, even if the alcohols are moderate. And it tends to have very, very good acidity. But the way that it moves on the palate for me is very unique, very different. Yeah, it's approximately 30 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean. You can actually see the Atlantic from the ridge. So I think we can, without taking up too much more of your time on these, we can say that we have 3 single origin chenins, approximately the same vine age. So all the vines here between 40 and 50 years of age, all representing what we feel is good South African genetics in very, very interesting places. And hopefully you can see the wines are very different and of a reasonably high quality.
Very, very different. Especially that last wine is sort of quite apart from the first two to my palate. Great, thank you. That's a really wonderful tour of South African old vine Chenin. I want to make sure, of course, though, that we reserve some time here for our French colleague, Pierre, who is an excellent vigneron in his own right and works with some of the oldest, is that fair to say, some of the oldest vineyards here in the Loire?
It's an option, yeah, probably. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, so let's. I see folks with bottles in the back. Let's go ahead and pour wine number 4 if we could. But just tell us a little bit about you, about your project, your winery, and how is it that you come to have 100-plus-year-old vineyards?
Well, it's kind of related to the story I heard from Chris and Rosa.
It's better to have the microphone in front rather than underneath. Okay.
Yeah. I was saying it's the origin of what I did is quite related to the story I heard from Chris and Rosa, because my parents were selling grapes to the cooperative here in the Loire, Cave de la Loire. And it appeared that they have in their vineyards, they had like 25 hectares of vineyard in Anjou, in the Léon River Valley. And they had some very old vines of Chenin in the steep slopes of the just above the river. So it was vines that were not very adapted to the cooperative system because not very high yielding and quite high, very hard work to produce something decent quantity of grapes. So it was some vineyards they kept for like heritage and personal love for the place, but not for economic reasons. So when I came back with them in 2012. I started with a very old vine called the Cardinal, so it's the place where the wine we are tasting now. And it's a very small place, 0.2 hectares, just on schist, just above the river, on south-facing slope. And I started with just this place, working on evening and weekends, and making wines in my parents' garage for the first years. And it happened that they had also some other old vines in other places, and year after year I took some of them, so mostly Chenin. There is also a bit of very old Sauvignon, old for Anjou because it's been planted in the late 50s. And years after years I took some mostly old Chenin from the 50s, 40s. And also with time vines a bit younger from the 90s and from 2002. But now, yeah, it's I try to work mainly on specific site Chenin, even if everything is quite close. Everything is like a square of 1 kilometer. But a lot of difference of soils, different of exposures too, and now on 4.5 hectares of vines, I do like 6 or 7 or 8 specific sites of Chenin, dry Chenin.
What is the youngest vineyard that you farm?
Well, young vines are quite young. It's from the 2017.
Okay. And is that a clonal selection or?
Well, my father planted it, so yeah, it's a clonal selection. I didn't plant it. I just started to plant one plot of Masterclass selection 2 years ago. We are just close to a place called the Cardegatine, where I have very old vines, 70 years old. And it was just the plot just near, and so we try to take the most of the diversity from the old vines, regardless of the variances. Sorry, but it was very specific place because just near, so just added 3 rows to the existing place. So we try to multiply not the best grapes, but the most of the diversity possible.
So talk about that diversity, right? So you've got this clonal selection that your father has planted. That's only a little not so old, very young vines, and then you have this 100-plus-year-old vineyard. How different are they? Like what do you see in the vines that are planted in this 100-year-old vineyard, and how they behave and what they're shaped like, and the kind of wine and flavors they yield versus the clonal selection that's the young vines?
Yeah, there is a lot of differences. When you go, for example, in the Cardinal, in the place of the wine, you see like even visually very different grapes, different shapes of grapes. Some are very oval, like rugby balls. Some are very round, some bigger, smaller. Bunches are very different too, and leaves too. I at some point some questions if everything was Chenin or if it was French too, but Jean-Michel Boursicot came a few years ago to do like research on old vines in Anjou to make a conservatory. Maybe Etienne will speak about the conservatory later, or Virginie even. Perfect, Virginie is here. So Virginie was here in the vineyard too with Jean-Michel Boursicot a few years ago to pick, and not only here but in many different old vines in Anjou, in the Léon, to try to pick lot of different old vines of Chenin, to pick the woods, to multiply, to create a conservatory of the widest diversity of Chenin. And they told me everything is Chenin, no problem, but with very different phenotype expression.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very amazing, and but with some viruses too. So if we want to multiply this seriously, we need to be very focused and careful on the virus presence.
So those morphological differences, to use a word that you used earlier, Patrice, amongst all those different Chenin vines in that old vineyard. I know you're not a farmer, you're a scientist, and but does the variation that you saw in those differences between and among the clones in both South Africa and the Loire, does that translate to the kind of variation that Pierre is seeing in the vineyard? Is that how we should understand those genetic differences and that drift over time?
Well, I think it's not a direct correlation between the genetic diversity and the morphological diversity. And that's what I was telling at the discussion. I mean, to be sure of that, we should put them all together, because, you know, like the genome, the DNA is, I mean, a lot of the DNA is not, I mean, doesn't code for genes. And many, well, we haven't checked yet where these where the variability is located in the genome. So some of it is probably in genes, and maybe part of the reason of the variability found. But many of the modification can also be in the genome that is not coding for anything. And then there is also the question of, well, again, I mean, you mentioned the viruses also, and we know that viruses have also some effect on the morphology. So that also may be one of the reasons also of the variability. Yeah. And then I was talking about also epigenetics, which we haven't been doing it here because epigenetic analysis is much more difficult to do, and it can be also some epigenetic things, because we know that the environment has a big effect on epigenetic marks and things like that. So
and just, I'm going to check myself here. So epigenetic, it means a genomic change in an organism over the life of that organism. So something that happens due to a particular organism in a particular place and a particular time in its own lifetime, as opposed to something that's passed down through genetics. Is that right?
Some of the epigenetic marks can be passed in the grafting, but yeah, most of it is really just on one individual. Actually.
Okay, great. All right, Pierre, back to you. Thank you for answering that question. What else do we need to know about this absolutely delicious wine that we're tasting?
Yeah, I don't know. It's very simple winemaking, just pressing grapes and ferment and wait for a year. And,
if it was that easy.
Nothing much. In the vineyard, so it's organic. But we are in a place that can be quite dry. We are on very hard rock, and water management is a kind of issue. But what we see is on this kind of old vines, there is much more resilience to seasons differences. Even if it's very rainy, like we had both two last years, or very dry, there is not so much differences in the growing season compared to young vines that are making very big difference. Mm-hmm. But we try now to do as little perturbation of the soil as possible. So no soil work. We try also now. We are just beginning not to cut the grass, but to
flatten it.
To make a
compact it.
Compact it. Yeah. To have the grass just making it cycle and then put it back on the ground, and so it's not consuming more water like trying to grow again in the season. But except of that, it's very simple. Yeah. At first years, I was trying to pick in different time, because maturities in this vineyard is very
multiple
different.
Passes.
Multiple passes, because it can be 1 or 2 weeks differences. Let's say between some vines that seems to be much more earlier, and some are quite later. But with time, I try also, some years it's still in several pickings, but trying to do one picking at what time is like taking one picture of what is happening in this vineyard. So you have all the differences. Some vines are more give more richness and more power, and some give lots of acidity, keeping it later. I think it's more interesting to have this to keep the complexity of the place and not trying to just find an optimal maturity of each place. Yeah.
Great.
So we're trying to do this on all the old vines, and all the winemaking for all the old vines specific sites is the same.
So if we tasted them all, we would only be tasting the
difference of
site
place,
and those vines. That's great. I think I want to make sure that we open this up for questions. I don't know, I've still got plenty more for these folks, but I'm sure you have as well. But before I do that, I want to find out whether you all have questions for each other. In particular, Pierre and Chris. Do you want to? One of my first questions was just listening. Do you talk about picking all in one pass? I can't remember if you do that, Chris. Is that part of your? There's another mic there if you want.
Oh, sorry. So with us, we don't really need to do triage. It's possible, of course, we can do it, but I appreciate Pierre's philosophy. I think it's the correct one. If you're in your vineyard a lot, and you, over the years, you become intimate with the vineyard and you see what it's doing and you see how it's responding to the season, then, in my opinion, it is good to take that snapshot of the vineyard, of the vintage. You pick it in one shot, and then you have some richness, especially with goblet. We have all of the wines we tasted are goblet vines, and if you imagine a goblet, it's like a crown, So you have much more. You have a higher range of ripeness on a goblet than you do on a trellis, because you have some vines some grapes are in the sun, some are in the shade, etc. You understand? So yeah, I agree with his philosophy there, definitely.
Yeah. Any burning questions before we let the audience in on things? Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for your work.
Yeah.
This has been very exciting for us.
Yes.
Very exciting, thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a question for Patrice. At the last Congress, it was a few years ago here, in Anjou, Jean-Michel Boursicot came also with a new hypothesis about the parents of Chenin with Sauvignonas. I don't know if you have more certainty of this.
Did everybody hear the question? That last time at the Congress, there was a scientist who came and hypothesized that the parents of Chenin are Savagny and Sauvignonas.
Sauvignonas.
And excuse my pronunciation, I'm sorry.
Well, no, Jean-Michel asked us also to confirm this hypothesis. So that's why I didn't want to put it on my slides, but yeah, that's still one of the. Oh, sorry, that's still an hypothesis that it's quite interesting, and with now that we have the data on whole genome, we are going to test it on a larger scale, but it's still something that is going on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So not definitive yet, but
yeah, I mean, still a great possibility.
Plausible hypothesis.
Both are there. The parents, and I don't remember if we have some data to identify the female and the male parents, but because like in the way to differentiate if it's the male or the female. It's because there is some specific DNA that is coming from the female parents, and because like all the chloroplast and mitochondrial DNA comes from the mother eggs, and so if we are able to differentiate the chloroplast genome from both parents, then we can see which one is a male, which one is a female. But I don't have the data yet. I'm not sure we can do it.
all right. Let's throw it out to you guys. Who's got questions? I see Michael here in front. You can either say it and I'll repeat it, or we may have microphones. Yeah?
This was a great session. Thank you for putting this together. My question is directed to Patrice. How quickly do you see this clonal, I would call it biotype, because they're not truly reproductions, evolve in the vineyard? If you start with clone 220, for example, 2 years later, is it still clone 220, or is it now clone 222?
This is a great question.
How do you study that?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. And today I don't have the answer of that. But I agree with you that that's one of the difficulty. So we are also working on another cultivar, Merlot, and for that we have some. We can trace some plants, and for I guess 2 generations of grafting, and so that's something we are going in the moment, and so trying to see if we can see many differences between the three generations, and just to try to answer to your question.
Yeah, totally. I've had the same question. Totally fascinating. But part of it has to do with the quote-unquote stability of a particular grape's genome, right? And I've certainly heard anecdotally in the world of wine that some grapes are much more unstable and much more likely to mutate in the field than others. And my understanding is Merlot is relatively stable in comparison to something like Pinot Noir. Sure. How would you characterize the genetic stability of Chenin in the spectrum of wine grapes? Is it much more variable or much less?
Well, I guess all of you should be able to answer that, because like if you go into, like, for example, Pinot vineyards, sometimes you can see some modification even in one vineyard. And I don't know if you ever had seen any big differences, for example, like in color or in. I mean, you said that there are some difference in shape, but so I guess really the people who answer that question should be the growers, because I mean, personally I don't have any experience, but that's really what you see in the fields that can see that.
Yeah.
I can add to that. Certainly in the vineyards that we work with that are planted late 60s, early 70s, the berries tend to be rounder, and the bunch is a little bit tighter, and then it looks like through the late 70s, early 80s, for some reason there's some looser bunches and more rugby ball shapes. I don't know. But certainly there's variability even within our little family of Chenin selections in South Africa.
And how quickly that changes and what is the source of that change is a great mystery, right? Is it the soil? Is it the climate? Is it the planting density? Is it the flora and fauna around there? Is it the rootstock that it's grafted on? There are a lot of questions we don't know the answer to in this space. All right, what else you got? Yes, Natalie. Okay, wait for the mic.
Oh, sorry. Okay, for both Chris and Pierre, did these wines go through malolactic fermentation, and then also across all of your Chenin programs, do all of them go through, not go through? Is it a case-by-case basis?
I can start. For me, it's not a real question, actually. Fermentation is very long. It's like indigenous yeast fermentation with no starter. So we don't do like a pre-harvest 1 week before. It just starts by itself. So fermentation can be very long until the spring or even next summer. And most of the time the malolactic fermentation is going through in the same time, with not much question about it. It's done almost every time, yeah, without any certitude.
I'm with Pierre. I'd just like to expand a little bit, and this is my theory. and it probably maybe a guy like Etienne or Patrice could get into it one day if they have time. But we treat every vineyard that comes into the winery as a completely separate microbial culture, because effectively you're making food, right? Wine is food. It's the slowest of the slow foods. It's a cultured food. And if you think about every vineyard, you know, the radiation, the aspect, the humidity, all of these things have an impact on the microflora that are in that vineyard. And the microflora has an enormous impact on the wine. So the microflora, parcel per parcel, is a part of the place, is a part of the terroir. So we let's say we're pressing Swartland on the Tuesday and Stellenbosch on the Wednesday. Every single surface that will touch grape juice is completely sanitized and dry, bone dry, before it touches grape juice. And of course, in a winery environment, you will never have a perfect. There will be some cross-pollination, of course, but I do feel that we're achieving some level of separation between the different microbial cultures from the different vineyards, because we see very similar fermentation trajectories every year. Some vineyards are always slow to start, slow to go. Some vineyards are fast. It's always the same every vintage, regardless of other factors. And then malolactic fermentation, I think we feel the same. The goal is to have the complete expression of the vineyard in the bottle, and there's magic locked up there with malolactic fermentation. You know, you're taking just like the sugar is a substrate that is going to unlock all of this magic, all the flavor that's coming out that's bound to the sugars, etc. The same is true for malolactic fermentation. It's an exceptionally important part of unlocking the magic of the place. You know, using the microbial subset that lives in that place. So yeah, it has to go through malo, especially if you want to do like we do and bottle it without sterile filtration. The wines, we're bottling directly from lees through a flycatcher basically. So sometimes the wines are a little bit hazy, but nobody seems to mind. But yeah, if you want to do that, you have to have mellow dry wine. Yeah.
Yep. Great. I see Renee back there, yeah.
Yes, and I already have a microphone, so I'm ready to go. I wanted to ask Patrice and anyone else on the panel that has some thoughts on this is, through the study, did you notice any new clonal variation that you weren't expecting, and maybe something new showing up that you weren't expecting to see in the data sample from the clones of Chenin that you were studying? And if there is kind of like a leading clone in each area that had a large focus.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I really understand your question, but I mean, we have been analyzing the 26 clones, I mean, with no differences. Yeah, so I'm not sure I answer you. I'm sure I don't answer your question, but I'm sorry.
If I may, I think what she's asking is, and I think we all wanted to know if the differences were genetically, and you showed us that they are genetically very different. And then to answer your question, and as Patrice has mentioned, we need to plant all these clones in the same common garden to see how we go from the genetic diversity.
I'm wondering if there's like any like clones that have no name to them whatsoever, something new that was showing up that was like a brand new clone through the study that you did that you weren't expecting to see. Was that part of your data set as well?
They studied specific clones, and what we saw in those graphs were the differences in the genetic makeup of those same clones. So there was 220 in Loire and 220 in South Africa, and the DNA of each of those is statistically significantly different at this point, after only 50 years, assuming that they were the same clone when they left the Loire and ended up in South Africa. I think maybe embedded in your question is also this question of, are those changes big enough to consider those different clones at this point? And do you have an answer to that?
No, but also I want just to emphasize the fact that we analyze only one plant, one leaf in one plant, and so that makes it also different, because I mean on another works on Pinot, which is known to be very variable, we were able to find differences between two branches of the same plant. So that means, this data is good, but it's also needs to be a little bit relate. I mean, we need to think about it also a little bit differently. I mean, maybe we should be able to analyze many plants on the same clones to really see if that difference is so. I do say is so important. And to answer, I mean, maybe I don't answer it, but again, you know, like there are some new clones today, and Virginie is doing lots of works on new clones and things like that, and I'm sure there are. I mean, Rosa, you were talking also about new clones in South Africa. So yeah, I'm sure this data needs to be. I mean, and I know. I mean, I talk with Etienne, who wants also to try to analyze other clones and do a more throughout analysis.
I see the time. I just quickly want to continue with what she said, and I think it's helpful for the question you asked, Patrice. Just to remind everyone, when we do clonal selections, they take place at a specific time or a specific period in the wine sector. The 220 French clone was selected in the 1970s when we had cold years, so we were looking for early ripening clones, low acidity, high sugar. The 1,200 that you saw on the top, they are the most recent selected clones. The study program took place from 2008 to 2012, so they were registered as official clones in the French registry, let's say 2014, 2013. And what is interesting is when we did that program 10 years ago, we were selecting clones for climate change. And what I found interesting in the result of Patrice is that it's the only clone that shows a breach towards the South African clone. So now we're looking at clonal material that are more tolerant to drought, more tolerant to heat, higher acidity, lower sugar. And what I find interesting in your result, I'm not saying it's the answer, but we see that the selection of a clone at a specific time is extremely important. And I think Chris and Pierre will say the same. They look at the vines, they select them based on a specific context. And that's where we need to do a lot of improvement, both at a national level, how we select clones, because clonal selections are 20, 30-year programs. And we need to be much more dynamic. I don't know if you remember yesterday the presentation, temperatures are changing very rapidly, and we need to ask questions that give us answers much more rapidly.
Which is why we need to celebrate, investigate, and preserve the genetic diversity of the Chenin Blanc.
We need national programs. Remember the clonal garden of Virginie, and she will talk about that this afternoon. And to answer the question that was asked previously, we have 14 certified Chenin Blanc clones, but we have over 400 what we call selections, accessions, genotypes. So there's a massive genetic pool already in France that allows us to find solutions. And yeah, so hopefully we will get new clones. There was one last question here that wanted to be asked.
Yes, you've touched on part of my question, which is I'm assuming you envision a time in the not too distant future when there'll be a much greater exchange of clones between and among the two countries.
So in fact, the main clones from South Africa have been planted in the Loire. No?
No. Quickly, and I talk on behalf of Virginie because I see him like the guy who did all the work, but Yves did all the work with INRAE. They explored South Africa, all the old vines in partnership with the Old Vine Project. And like Pierre mentioned, the focus was virus-free material. So the only place where they found virus-free material was in the Citrusdal Mountain, in Picaniers's Kloof, and those selections have been brought back to France. And now we spoke with Patrice. I think the next step is bringing back the selections that the South Africans already selected over the period of 3-4 centuries. But yeah, and again, I think the genetic story, and that's maybe why this session is so interesting. Since 2019, the Chenin Blanc International Conference that is taking place has asked questions that has allowed us to do research based on what happens in this conference. So we had the parents, and then Patrice and Johan Berger started to work together. So yeah, and today having winemakers like Natalie here, and obviously we spoke about Australia, there's still so much questions that we can answer in terms of the scope of the framework of this conference.
So unfortunately, I think we are out of time, yes? Okay. Thank you all for your engaging questions and for your listening to what I hope you thought was a really valuable panel. I learned a ton, both putting it together and just sitting here on the stage today. The wines were fantastic. I can't wait to see your vineyard later in the week. Thank you all for your participation and for contributing to this session.
Bravo. Thank you very much. So we will resume the next session at 11 o'clock. So a little coffee break. And then for those that have chosen the masterclass, please, you need to follow Sophie, who's just standing over there, after the break. Hein? Et ça commence aussi à 11h, le masterclass avec Sophie, il faut la suivre. Et c'est à la villa. Et pour la session avec Jamie Good, it will be here at 11 o'clock.
At 11 o'clock.